Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, let's do a little Middlekauff mailbag. At John Middlekauff, 2 Fs is the Instagram. DMs are wide open. At John Middlekauff, Instagram, DMs wide open. Longtime Niners fan. I'm nervous that Kyle Shanahan, when behind, seems to lose his way. Can he actually win the Super Bowl? I think he can as long as he's in the lead. Because I think it's very, very difficult for his scheme. He does not like to spread it out and play a drop-back passing game. And a huge reason for that is you can manipulate an offensive line. One thing I learned when I was in the league, and he did this when he was with Kubiak with the Texans. Obviously, Trent Williams starts on every team in the league. But you can be very, very successful in Kyle's scheme with average offensive linemen. Because I need good athletes in zone blocking schemes, and a lot of my pass is play action. When I play like Andy Reid and just go true drop back, I get in trouble over the course of a game. But he doesn't do it very often. Well, what happens when you're down 14 points going in the fourth quarter? You're not running play action passes, right? Or if you are, they're not stopping anyone in their tracks on defense. So his scheme is very, very predicated on the run game. Well, for the run game to matter late in the game, you got to be in the game. Because you're not running it down 15 points, right? With 6 minutes to go, you got to pass it. So when everyone knows you got to pass it, that is somewhat of a crutch because their offensive linemen aren't great. I mean, their offensive linemen beside Trent are really average. Just true drop back, their right tackle is not very good. If they get in a situation where they're passing every play, the right tackle is a lower tier right tackle in the NFL. But why you can function with them no problem is because they dominate in the run game. So most offensive linemen are relatively good in the run game, especially if they're good athletes. But it's not to me as much Kyle. It's more the way they can manipulate the roster because they don't invest as much beside Trent into the offensive line. They're not paying anyone on the offensive line. The 2 guards are both on rookie contracts. The center's cheap, and the right tackle's on a rookie contract too. He's not very good. Thank God for Trent Williams, which is a major question mark, big picture with the Niners. I do think they can win the Super Bowl. They should win the Super Bowl. Do I think they're going to? Would I bet my life savings on it? I would not, because there are flaws. If Trent were to go down, their offensive line can get weird quick, really quick. So, big year for Kyle. Like, ultimately for Harbaugh and Lamar, well, I guess Lamar hasn't won one, but like they got to a Super Bowl. That means John's won one, been to another one if he loses it. Like, it's not that Lamar's already got a couple MVPs. It would suck, but it's not the end of the world. He would clearly be a top 2 or 3 quarterback coming into the season next year. Ton of momentum. Their team's good. Kyle's like, bro, you kind of got to strike where the iron's hot. How many more years you got Trent? What happens if they win it and Trent retires? I just don't know what they're going to do. They don't really have a succession plan there. I mean, no one really does, but they're not drafting high enough to get a good guy. Why would the Saints be picking ahead of the Colts? Both were 9-8, and the Saints beat the Colts. Shouldn't the Colts be picking 14? And shouldn't the Saints be picking 15? Well, when it's just 2 teams, I'm pretty sure you go head-to-head. But I pulled up the schedule here. You got the Colts, the Jags, the Saints, the Seahawks, the Bengals, the Packers, who are obviously in the playoffs. But so the Bengals and the Seahawks, it's not based on just the record / head-to-head. I think it goes to maybe conference or maybe who had the tougher schedule. Because, for example, the Patriots lost to the Commanders, right, this season. But the Commanders are picking 2 and the Patriots are picking 3. Why? Because the Cardinals also have the same record at 4-12 or 4-13. So it's really based on, I don't have the exact requirements, but it's not based on head-to-head in that situation when it's more than a 2-team tie. But I hear what you're saying if you're mad at, if you're a Colts fan. Hey, John, huge fan of your pod. It's probably the best sports podcast out there. This Dylan guy. I got a question for the mailbag. I'm a lifelong Eagles fan, and recently, with all the struggles, it sounds like Sirianni is on the hot seat and could be fired depending on how the Bucks game goes. If Nick is to be fired because of how the Eagles front office is not afraid to move off head coaches, would the Eagles be the top team that coaches would want to go to? And who do you think would be the best fit out there if available coaches on the market? Well, I actually think that they would be all over. I think they would be interested in Belichick. I actually think Mike Vrabel. He is now. They have historically hired offensive coaches, Sirianni, uh, obviously, Doug, Chip, Andy. So maybe Belichick and Vrabel, but like they would be in win now mode, right? They're paying this quarterback. What if Vrabel says, I'm bringing Arthur Smith, physical run game? They have a good offensive line. He's a defensive guy. I don't think it's crazy with Jalen to bring in coaches like Belichick and Vrabel. I think they'd be in the mix for those two guys. Question for the mailbag. I'm a bartender outside of Cincinnati. So naturally, we talk a lot about the Bengals. I was wondering, what do you think the Bengals should do with T. Higgins? Try and sign him or tag and trade him for picks? I know we have to pay Chase too, so I'm curious. Well, you already paid the quarterback a lot of money, and Chase is going to get a ton of money. So I really think the move is to tag and trade. Now, the problem is, his value to you is pretty high. Like, he's a really good player. Is anyone giving a first-round pick to give T. Higgins $22 million a year? That's the problem with, like, Brandon Ayuk with the Niners. It's like he's an excellent player. But is someone giving you pick like 21 to then give him $65 million? Right? We've seen that happen with A.J. Brown, but, he's an elite player. I think that T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk group makes it kind of complicated. I think they're in similar situations. Like, can you have two highly paid wide receivers? The 49ers have Deebo Samuel, makes a lot of money. They have Jamar Chase, who's about to make a lot of money. The problem is Jamar is a true number one. Deebo's like this unique kind of outlier player. I think they trade him. Can you explain the difference between type of coach firings? Why is it Vrabel was fired and Pete Carroll was out as head coach? Belichick is parting ways with the team. Are there actual differences that lead to it being reported in different ways? To me, it seems more like a nice way of saying they got fired. Chris, you hit the hammer right there I guess you hit the nail right on the head. I can't even talk right now. You know what I mean? You nailed it. Let's just say that. Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick and Mike Vrabel all had the same outcome. They were told, you are not coming back on this team. You are not going to be the head coach here anymore. The Titans don't care that much about Vrabel, so they're just like, we're firing him. With Bill Belichick, he has led to hundreds of millions of dollars in actual cash in Robert Kraft's pocket, on top of the valuation of his franchise and the overall relevance of the human being. Seattle Seahawks. Now, while Paul Allen is dead, his family benefited greatly from hiring Pete Carroll. So when you have two guys like that, you just treat them a little differently. Did you notice this? Mike Vrabel didn't speak when he got fired. Honestly, maybe I missed it. I haven't even seen him talk. Like, has he even released a statement? Bill Belichick stood up there. Now, he didn't answer questions next to Robert Kraft and said, today's a day to be grateful. Pete Carroll cried up there on the podium with his players were in the front row. So it's about human equity, right? You feel less inclined, a girl you've been dating for a month, if you ghost her or whatever, right? Well, someone you've been married to for 15 years and you have 3 children with, and you kind of like her, you just want to move on. The divorce is a little more complicated. So optics with this, it's all the same thing. It's all the same shit, different pile. I do think it means a lot to the Allen family and obviously the Crafts to not say the words, we fired him, even though we did. Not Robert, but like Dean Spanos, Arthur Blank, they did not care. Mark Davis, the only optics are like we fired these guys for our fan base. This one, I mean, it's a pretty big deal in Seattle and New England. It really is. I've always wondered why every quarterback doesn't go to special trainers to help clean up mechanics, where to read and when is the right time to throw. I feel like you should want to get better when a lot of money's on the line. They do. Like, you understand how hard these quarterbacks prepare film study wise at practice, reads, looks, going through all this stuff. You can go to the driving range all day long. You can hit the greatest shots on the driving range you've ever hit in your life. There is no guarantee on hole 6 that you can hit that 175-yard shot that you just hit. That's for $10, $100, however much you're playing a buddy for. Maybe the wind comes up, tucked pin, you get nervous. Football's the same thing. You can practice, taking notes, right? Preparing is a lot different than executing in any walk of life. You can walk yourself through like how you're going to ask her out, right? This is how I'm going to get a date with this girl. And then you're actually in front of her. It's a little harder, right? It all happens to us all when we're young. Maybe some of you listening right now, you know how you would land that job or, land that client for your small business or land this partner that you want to invest in your company. And then it's the difference when you're sitting down looking at them, right? You might maybe get nervous, maybe you don't, right? And the differences of executing at the highest level in whatever we're doing is just, listen, you can prepare all you want. Some people got it, some people don't. I have a question for the bag. The Houston and Indy rebuilds have happened at astonishing time, only in the space of 2 to 3 seasons. If a team rebuild takes longer than that, or they simply can't get it right, is it a sign of missed opportunities on players and coaches? Or is it more ingrained a problem with management or ownership? Well, let's take both, for example. Both hit the, not quarterback. The Houston did. Well, time will tell on Indy. They got the coach right. So when you have a good coach, you have a chance to be competitive. Now, the division kind of sucked, right? It doesn't feel like their schedules were that great. I could be speaking out of turn, but just closing my eyes thinking about a lot of their games. But to me, Houston hit the double whammy. D'Amico's a stud, and they nailed the quarterback. So if I tell you got a really good young quarterback and a really good young coach, it's going to accelerate everything you do. And Indy, they have an elite play caller and clearly a good coach because their defense isn't great and their personnel's not great, and they won most of their games with Gardner Minshew. So if I tell you you're an Atlanta Falcon fan right now, and whoever you end up hiring, whether it's Belichick or whoever else, you nail it. Do you think you're going to be good next year? Because I bet you your answer would be yes. If I tell you the Commanders that you hit a home run on this coaching search, you'd be like, well, maybe it doesn't happen this year, but maybe it does. What if we pick the right quarterback at number 2? And our defense is solid. We already got some pieces on offense. So it's not that complicated. It really isn't. Now, depending on how deep your team is how many games, the difference of being a 7-win team and a 10-win team, maybe. But if you have the good coach and you have a good quarterback, you're going to be in pretty good shape immediately. I agree with your take on it being time for Pete to move on. Been saying it for a couple years now, and the team needs new life. As bittersweet as it is, Pete has built such a strong culture in Seattle, and with John Schneider taking over the team, do you think there could be a culture power struggle with a new coach coming in with the organization? From you seeing Andy Reid to Chip Kelly, hoping for Vrabel. Fortunate to have seen them in Super Bowls. Grass isn't always greener. I think the difference is Howie was a relatively young GM when Chip got there. And Chip in 2012 was infinitely more famous and powerful than Howie Roseman. Now, in 2023-24, that's not the case. Howie is pelts on the wall. He's built and drafted and made moves like a high-level GM for a long time. So if John Schneider was new on the job, let's say Pete had, let's say equivalent of like John Schneider had left a couple years ago and they had a newer guy and had less juice, then I'd be like, yeah, John Schneider's been there for 14 seasons. It's why when Pete was getting emotional, he kept pointing at John, like, it's your time now, And I think that John, I mean, I view him as a Howie, an Eric DaCosta, like less than John Lynch. Like, to me, he's big time, man. He really is. So I think it's more as a coach, you want to come in and work and integrate with him. Look at the Ravens, for example, right? Ozzie, now DaCosta. Like, when you have a good personnel department, lean on them, use them. We're all in this to win together. So I don't see that. No. Mailbag question. Bay Area taquerias versus Arizona. Who wins? Honestly, I don't think the Mexican food's that great in the Bay Area personally. Having lived in Fresno, I even think it's a little better in Sac. In Arizona, I don't think it's. I haven't been to like great spots. To me, like San Diego blows. I would say obviously the Bay Area out of the water. Uh, Taquerias. I don't even think I've been to a taqueria here. I, in a weird way, haven't eaten that much Mexican food. Which sounds crazy. I make a decent amount of it because I'm not a great cook. She does most of the cooking, but when I cook, I make tacos because that's my go-to meal, or burritos, or enchiladas. But I don't think I've been to a taqueria here. When evaluating the Packers' offensive roster, do you see a need to add veterans? We know their young core has potential, but can this be complicated by veteran pieces? Complemented. It's not uncommon to see younger players take step backwards in year 2 or year 3. Another Packer related question. What type of market is there for Jair Alexander? The team captain stunt, couple injuries. Yeah, I mean, I'd be a little stunned if he's back. Probably ended it. You guys know your roster better than me. I mean, I've started following you much more the second half of the season, but the running back's sweet, like really good. Watson, when he's healthy, is a baller. The other two young receivers are good. The young tight end looks good. You guys always draft and develop offensive linemen. So I think you can always add a veteran presence if you think you lack leadership. But if you have leadership, you just add players who can help you play. Like if you feel that, let's say I'm just hypothetically speaking, like Aaron Jones is the heartbeat of the offense. He's the leader. You feel good about it that. And maybe one of your offensive linemen is like a big time leader. Maybe you're not really searching for leadership. Maybe you just have a need at, again, I don't know your offensive lineman like the back of my hand, but maybe you think you can upgrade at left guard. Maybe you think you could upgrade at right tackle. You do something like that. Or maybe you think this guy's better than your fourth receiver. I mean, you guys always kind of penny pinch that way anyway. I'm a lifelong Buckeye fan. Do you think it's possible that Ohio State would be willing to do whatever it takes to bring Vrabel back to be the next head coach? I know it's probably a long shot with him being a top candidate and there are so many job openings this offseason. I was a big believer in Day early on. But if Vrabel has any interest in going back to coach Columbus, he coached there once upon a time with Urban, I believe it would be the perfect time to make the move. I just think under no circumstance, if you have the opportunity as a coach to be and you've been working in the NFL, I get like could Kirby Smart get an NFL job, right? Probably. Some of these guys. And I understand, hell, Sarkisian, a lot of guys like him. But if you have a chance to be an NFL head coach or a college head coach, you take the NFL job because the college job is harder. Every player in your roster is a free agent. Even at Ohio State, like, it's just you can lose guys in the transfer portal. You constantly have to be recruiting your own team. And the recruiting is just 365. In the NFL, like, there's no recruiting after free agency in the draft. Right? If you want a guy on another team, you either trade for him or if he's cut, you sign him or claim him on the waiver wire. The college football is a lot more complicated effort and time wise. So could they afford Vrabel? 100%. Do I think he'd be interested if he could go to the Commanders and the Patriots? I would rather go to the Commanders and the Patriots than Ohio State. And Ohio State, you could argue, is the best college job. I think once you've won playoff games, it's hard. Saban failed. right? Petrino failed in terms of like they weren't going to the playoffs. So it's easy to transition back where you can dominate. Like Mike Vrabel thinks he can win in the NFL, like win playoff games. Why wouldn't you just stay in the NFL? He knows he could win at Ohio State. The NFL to me is more of a challenge. College is more of like just it's got to be more of my effort and my do I want to play politics with young players? It's hard. When you're in it, it's kind of all you know, but once you get out of it, you're like, I ain't going back. With all the talk to Belichick leaving, I have heard this take a lot. He knows nothing about offense. How can a coach of that level, who is a defensive genius, not become adept at both sides of the ball? He is able to stop every offense, but would struggle to put into something in together himself. It just doesn't make sense to me. I've been trying to describe this and explain this for a long time. One, fundamentally, your mindset as a defensive coach or as an offensive coach are dramatically different, right? Like, let's use a real world example. I'm trying to think here. If I run, you read some of these articles or books about these people in finance, like Wall Street screaming at each other a lot like football, like that mindset of just like, this is insane. Like if you're running a fund, sell, buy, get on guys, like that mindset of constantly making money. Like that's how your mind thinks, all about money, right? When you walk into the office every day, how can we make more? How can we increase our returns? And you just become crazy in that world. And that's all you think about. Now you understand like HR, you understand, landing clients and putting on a smile and whining and dining. Like you can do all the other stuff, but the majority of your time is spent psychologically, mentally focused on making coin, focused on making cash, being wired that way. Where if I'm running HR, my mindset on a daily basis, or if I'm an IT guy, is dramatically different. Well, think about in football, if you're a defensive coach, Mike Vrabel, Mike Tomlin, whoever, every single day you show up, you're thinking about fucking hitting people, making tackles, physically imposing your will on someone else. As an offensive guy, when you show up to work, you're thinking about gaining yards, outthinking the opponent. It's not as much about will, right? Obviously, you have to have will and desire and work ethic and all that stuff on offense. But ultimately, it's about scheming. How can I design stuff? How can I create? It's like the guy in the IT department creating a system for the company, right? And then the guy running all the business in the company. They're thinking about things dramatically different, yet they all work for the same company. So, of course, Bill Belichick understands like what a certain route is or certain blocking concepts, but he's never called offense every single play for a season, let alone over the course of seasons. So one, even if you understand offense, he doesn't have that mindset coming to work on a daily basis of an offensive play caller. And two, I just think your personality is impacted by it. You either got it or you don't, right? And defensive coaches and offensive coaches tend to be different. One's a little more optimistic, one's a little more negative. Why? Because defense is kind of it's a completely different operation, even though it's the same sport and they're going up against each other. And maybe I'm describing that terribly, but I just think when we say these guys don't know offense, it doesn't mean they don't understand like what a wheel route is or don't understand the difference between like a gap scheme and a zone scheme. It's like, how can Mike Zimmer and Kyle Shanahan, the way each guy comes to work on a daily basis, back when Mike was the coach, right, as the head coach and Kyle's the head coach, one guy's the defensive play caller, one guy's the offensive play caller, can't be the same. It doesn't mean that, like, for example, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Andy Reid don't like big physical guys on defense and don't understand what coverages are. But on a play-in, play-out basis, could they just become the defensive coordinator? I think they would fail. Now, maybe they could become good at it over the course of 5 years, right? You get better as an offensive play caller the more you do it. That's the other thing. You are working on your craft as an offensive coordinator or an offensive guy. It's why a lot of coaches, when you go to staff meetings, say we and I. Say we are doing this. It's like, well, you're talking about the offense because they view themselves on that side of the ball. So I might have done a terrible job right there of explaining it. And it's probably not even possible to explain it all because some guys are going to know more than others. But when you have spent all of your effort and all of your time, think about whatever job you're doing and you do it more and more and more specifically, you start mastering it. Even if you have management responsibilities or you're the CEO of the company, you do certain things way better than other things, even if you have a general understanding of that other stuff. So I think that's the best way I can describe it. Listen, it doesn't mean these guys also don't try to learn and always, gain knowledge on that side of the ball. I think Belichick could talk offensive football and philosophy with Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay easily. It just doesn't mean he can put it into practice well. I mean, there are a lot of university professors. If you walked into an econ class, you'd be like, God, this guy's fucking genius. Jamie Dimon or Elon Musk would laugh him out of a room. Doesn't mean they can put it into practice. Everything's easy on a whiteboard and in theory. Can you execute it? And that's what I think is hard for coaches. I think they, conceptually understand it, but it's difficult then to transition that to your team, your impact. It's hard. I mean, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I have a question about drafting and signing players and who has authority on the final call. I've heard that for the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan has the final say over John Lynch. Is this normal around the league for head coaches to have authority? And does this cause any conflict in organizations? What if GM and the coach disagree on who to draft or to sign? Thanks a lot. Well, I think this is pretty simple. Let's just use those two guys, for example. I'm gonna take an educated guess. Kyle Shanahan makes $16 million. And I'm gonna take an educated guess. John Lynch is one of the highest paid GMs in the league. He makes $9 million. Usually the guy that makes a lot more has more pull, right? Like John Schneider, forever, has a lot of pull in that organization. Probably makes $6-7 million. Pete was making like $17 million. So who's at the top of the food chain? Pete. Now, as you work with somebody, you know what they look for. You disagree, I would think, on the big stuff, probably less and less over time. But, I think a lot of times in a draft room, for example, whoever has the final say can go, no, we're taking this guy. Or sometimes the owner interjects. But ideally, you talk it out and you come to a resolution together, right? Think about a relationship. When you are like, what do you want to watch tonight? I'll promise you, I like watching different stuff than she does sometimes. I like a little more action television shows, shoot them up. She's like, too much violence. Like, I like watching guys get killed. A lot of people in a movie. I'm a 90s baby. Grew up on Arnold, Sylvester, and Bruce Willis. Sometimes you don't want to watch those movies. I get it. But you got to compromise. And you got to meet in the middle. And you kind of find out what each person likes. And you adapt from there. Football's no different, right? Now, if you're a GM, you don't want to force players on your coach, one, that don't fit, and two, that he doesn't like, right? Now, if he doesn't like them for the wrong reasons, it's your job to persuade him. You're like the sales guy. But you're in it together, so you kind of got to figure it out. And if there's conflict, I mean, there's conflict daily in football. This is a conflict-driven sport. People are constantly yelling at each other. People are constantly mad at each other. It's just a huge part of the business. So I think you kind of get used to it, I think Belichick's famous thing was like, there's no growth without confrontation. Would you please be able to sum up your opinion on John Lynch as a GM and what he has done for the Niners? As you can guess, I'm a huge Niners dude. I think the key to any GM is just helping the coach, especially when it's a young coach. And I think it's being there for the guy and helping him out when he gets overwhelmed or stressed. And these young guys like Kyle, Sean McVay, they just run hot. Now, Sean McVay, I think, is a little more positive. Kyle can be negative. Kyle can be a lot. Kyle can be, it's really, really difficult. The 49ers is not an easy operation during the week. They ask you a lot. It's fucking intense. They don't give you Mondays off after a week. Some of these games are blowing someone out 50-10. It's like, Kyle, we really got to go over the film on Monday. Can I just go over it on my own at my house? It's like, no, it's just intense. So I think one thing John is really good at for being like one of the most physical hitters in NFL history, he's a really easy, calm, just calming force. And I think that is big for the Niners. Because Kyle can be a lot in a good way. I mean, in a football way. So I think it's that type of stuff. Obviously, football-wise, look at the type of players they have. Look at the way John Lynch played. I think him and Kyle, physical football, and their identification of what they're looking for they're pretty good at it right now. I think the Ravens mastered it years ago. I think anytime, the Steelers have been good at it over the years, you kind of hang your hat on certain type guys and everyone's on the same page. Watch out. I thought about it and he's probably right. Should the Lions fire Dan Campbell for Ben Johnson? Imagine if the Bills fired McDermott and kept Daboll. I mean, Daboll won like 5 games this year. To me, that one's not fair. Brian Daboll is not proven to be better than Sean McDermott. I know there are a lot of articles out there, and I know Twitter thinks Sean McDermott's a village idiot, but that one, to me, Shane Steichen, Sirianni, totally understand. I would even say Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson. A lot of people can call plays, right? We've seen it over the years. Not a lot of people can lead the entire operation. Now, I understand, like, you have to think about it because it either is fine, like Sean McDermott, they won the division again. Like, Brian Daboll's been gone. They've won the division 2 years in a row. Like, that's happened. Is Dan Campbell winning the division next year when Ben Johnson leaves? I don't know. I wouldn't do it, and they're definitely not going to do it. But I get asking the question because he also wrote Sirianni and Steichen. If they could have a do-over, how are you going to fire Sirianni after Super Bowl, where they were leading during the Super Bowl? How are you going to do it? It's always easy to play that game now. It's impossible. It's never happened before. Wait, you get to the Super Bowl, you lose. We're going to lose our coordinator, who we kind of like more than you, so we fire you. Listen, you can do that like in a regular season or even like a one and done. It's impossible. If Dan Campbell wins a playoff game, it's their first playoff win in 30 years. I totally understand the question. I just think it's not happening. And I wouldn't do it. Could be wrong. What are the Packers' chances of the Super Bowl next year? I mean, let's make it through this year. Let's see how they look against the Cowboys. Honestly, though, if Jordan Love keeps ascending, they're going to be really good. And it's all on the defense. He's got to fire his buddy. He's got to hire a real defensive coordinator. And there should be a lot out there. Like Wink Martindale. Trying to think of other guys that have been fired. My mind's not really working right now, but a bunch of coaches just got fired. So, I mean, there's going to be people available. With the Seahawks job available, does Harbaugh come to Seattle? It worked out pretty well last time. The Hawks hired a guy leaving school, about to get slapped by the NCAA. I have a hard time seeing Jim Harbaugh replace Pete Carroll. I don't know if they hate each other, but they clearly do not like each other. Like, that's one of those things that, sometimes you have relationships because of in an industry where they're your rival, and you're like, I respect them, don't really like them. That feels like those guys do not like each other. So I don't think John Schneider would have anything to do with Jim Harbaugh. Not because John Schneider doesn't think he's good, but just I have a hard time seeing him do that to Pete. Fire Pete Carroll, and I'm not saying he fired Pete Carroll, but the organization fires Pete Carroll and they hire Jim Harbaugh to replace him. I just can't see that happening. It's like the coach thing. Like it's just not gonna happen. If it did, I'd be stunned. I mean, floored, fall out of my seat. If you tell me Jim Harbaugh is the coach of the Seahawks, I'd fall out of my seat. Even though this year is yet to be over, do you think the quarterback with the most pressure next year is Trevor Lawrence? His talent blinded us from the fact that he hasn't been very productive. Yeah, I mean, depending on how this season goes, I mean, Jalen Hurts is gonna be under a lot, man. There's gonna be a lot of pressure on Jalen Hurts. The difference is like, as a human, he's already been paid. He already made it. Trevor has not got the second contract yet. So, yeah, I mean, I think if Trevor Lawrence has another down season, we could be talking about, like, are we sure he's on the Jags in a couple years? Where Jalen obviously is not going anywhere. You wouldn't think. I mean, the Eagles pivoted from Carson Wentz faster than you can blink, so you never know. Been listening this season. Subscribe to your feed on Spotify. Not Collins. Appreciate you. Oregon State fan here. My question is, do you think Oregon State and Washington State have a chance of getting back in the Power 5? I don't. It's over, guys. Which, for you two, I feel bad. I really do. Because you tried. You know, it wasn't that long. It was a decade ago or whatever. Washington State hired Mike Leach. And they didn't just become a nationally relevant program. They started winning. They were really good. Oregon State with Jonathan Smith, and even earlier in the couple decades, Mike Riley, have just been good. Like, they try at football. But ultimately, in this world, like, some people run good businesses and they get swallowed up by Walmart, Target, or Costco. And they basically get put out of business. Not because they're bad at what they do, just because times change. And you kind of got caught up. I say this as been someone who's been on that level, is like, I do think you're more Fresno State, Boise State. That's kind of where you belong. Not with your mindset, but like the way this all played out, there wasn't going to be a conference who was going to take you. So to me, play Boise State, play Fresno State, play San Diego State, play New Mexico, and one of you two should win that conference a lot of the times. Now, what really sucks is the money, right? Going from a Power 5 conference, which guarantees you $30 to $40 million a year, the Mountain West pays $5 million. So that really sucks. But I don't say this with pride, right? Like, when I say Oakland lost all three teams, they should have. Place a joke. I mean, no shit. Like, I feel bad for you. I don't feel bad for the city of Oakland for losing 3 franchises in 5 years, which has never happened before and will never happen again. I feel bad for you guys, the way it all shook out. I really do. Like, for example, I live now in Scottsdale. To me, Arizona State belongs in the Mountain West too. They just don't care enough. They really do not. Arizona, Utah, like, yeah, those deserve to be in the Power 5. But to me, Arizona State, like, if you guys got asked out, Arizona State should have 100%. But they kind of hits their wagon because of their location. Y'all got screwed also because of your markets. I mean, no one cares about your two cities where you are. There's just not many people. Someone says, how do you only have... We have 17,000 subscribers on YouTube. Your content is excellent. We just started the page around Thanksgiving. So we've really only been going now probably, I have to add it up, 45 days maybe. We're slow and steady, baby. We'll keep swinging our pick. Got big plans this offseason. A lot of Pete Carroll questions. I think the average person outside of Seattle doesn't quite understand. Like, he got basically the Belichick treatment. You know, got to talk, was crying. Obviously, those pictures went viral of Russell Wilson at this dinner with all the players. It's like Richard Sherm, Cam Chancellor, Bobby Wagner. I mean, a bunch of dudes. That's a pretty big deal, you know? The Belichick thing, a lot of people text me the other day, like, you said it earlier this week. I just kind of put the pieces together, his age, kind of how they plateaued, the division with Sean and Kyle. The Belichick thing, we've been talking about him getting fired from like the start of the season. The Pete thing, it was like an educated guess. I could see it happening. But when it actually happened, it was pretty wow. The Belichick thing, waking up to Belichick being fired, is not a wow. It's just like, what day was it going to happen? And when they did it, how are they going to put it in a press release? How are they going to articulate it? he was fucking getting fired, right? But Pete thought he should. I thought it was time. Same thing with Mike Tomlin. If you tell me they lose and Monday morning Mike Tomlin's out at the Steeler coach, I've been talking about it all year. I'd be stunned. It's still shocking when you see it, right? Like Nick Saban retiring at 71, 72 years old. Is it that crazy? Of course not. He's been coaching for like 50 years. But when you see Nick Saban has retired, you do a double take. Like, am I reading this correctly? So, I don't know. It's the other thing is people ask, like, well, who do you think Seattle, New England? I don't know. Seattle hasn't hired a coach for 14, 15 years. New England hasn't had a coaching search in 25 years. Fucking no clue. John Schneider's never hired a coach. Who's running the Patriots right now? I don't know. They've had one guy run the Patriots since I was in 9th grade. I'm 39 years old. Since I was in 9th grade, 39 years old. Pete Carroll got the job. What year was that? Would have been 2010. Pete Carroll got the job. I was like in my mid-20s. I had hair. I was at Fresno State. I remember going to a practice with Tim Skipper, who was just the interim coach at Fresno State, to a Lane Kiffin practice at SC. We went in the spring. Went and watched USC practice. Lane Kiffin. I remember going to a Lane Kiffin practice. When I was still at Fresno State, I hadn't even gotten hired in the NFL yet. So these guys, I've had like 7 different jobs and 8 different things since. It's impossible to even, it's very, very difficult. Like it's easier, like Arthur Blank, clearly what they want. Washington, they're clearly all over Adam Peters, Ian Cunningham, get guys from winning organizations. To me, they're going to, Mike Vrabel, Jim Harbaugh, like it's Ben Johnson, like who they're going to go after a big fish, right? New England, nope. Gerard Mayo, yeah, maybe. Mike Vrabel, yeah, I could see it. I don't know. Maybe Robert Kraft once a night. Maybe they hired Dan Quinn. Want to get a smiley, happy guy. I don't know. Seattle, no freaking clue. None. It's like, well, they work with Dan Quinn. They're just going to hire Pete Carroll 2.0, the shittier version. They're really going to do that? Maybe. You believe it when you see a tweet. Like, oh, yeah, I can see that. And then you start thinking about, like, that's really what they're going to do? Why not, with offensive guys in an offensive league, hire Ben Johnson? But I don't know. I mean, it's just, you can't even really make an educated guess. People have no clue. They've never been in these spots. Never been in these spots. Either of these organizations, especially the Pats. The last time Pats were hiring a coach, I mean, did Google exist? Facebook didn't. Think of all the stuff, like how many majors did Tiger Woods have? Like 3? Peyton Manning, I mean, he was like 23 years old. Just start like wrapping your head around. So we're still like 4 years away from LeBron James entering the NBA. It's like 40 years old. Been in the league 24 years. I mean, think how crazy it all is. So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a wild couple weeks, man.